Hello, everybody. Welcome to a special Halloween edition of the Construction Record Podcast. I'm digital media editor Warren Frey, and with me today I have
Peter Kenter, longtime contributor to DCN-JOC and longtime horror and ghost story aficionado.
And if you've listened to these previous Halloween specials, you know it's all pretty much an excuse for us to talk about horror movies. But we're also going to talk today about Peter's really cool story about a boiler repair that went kind of supernatural. I don't want to do it in injustice by describing it further because Peter can do a much better job than I can. So, Peter, why don't you tell me what the story is about and how it relates to the supernatural?
Well, my brother has a gas fitter's license, an electrician, so he's a trades guy from way back. But one of his jobs about 20 years ago was to maintain the HVAC systems at Eldon House, which is London, Ontario's oldest home. It's a historic home maintained by the city. And when we were kids, everybody went there for a class trip because essentially when they gave that house, donated it, the family, to the city of London in 1960, everything was included. All the furniture, everything that they had in the house was there. So basically, this is a snapshot into the past. And my brother was one of the people that was responsible for looking after it. And I remember at the time him telling me this the same weekend. And he basically went in with a friend one night. A lot of people did not like to go to Eldon House at night because it was considered somewhat haunted.
Mm-hmm.
And he went in with his friend. They were both out, and he realized that he had to look in at Eldon House's boiler, which had had a lot of strange problems, new parts going mysteriously south over and over again. And he had to make sure that for this weekend, the boiler was operating so that people could take the tours on the weekend. So it's Friday night. He goes in with his friend. His friend's got a new digital camera. And sure, I'll go in with you. So my brother finds, again, the igniter has gone bad on this fairly new part. He's replacing it. And they go around, they fire up the boiler, go for a little tour. His friend takes some photos. And it's time to go. Had a few more adjustments on the boiler. But now it's about 3:30 in the morning. My brother is ready to go and set the alarm, which is in the staff room. And as he's walking, he sees a pair of black shoes sitting in front of him in the doorway that were not there before. And he says, one's in front of the other, just about like somebody stepped out of them and walked away. And he's like, okay, why are you pulling this fast one on me, he tells his friend. And he turns around. His friend is clutching his head and just screaming that his face is turning inside out. The pain is so intense, he can't move. And my brother's like, oh, man, this is... And then suddenly he feels the same thing. He says it's very much like a cross between electrical current and somebody scratching him going through his head. So he feels this on his face, going all the way back, out the back of his head. He says he's ready to yell out in pain because it's that bad, and then suddenly it stops, but he wants out, right?
Why wouldn't you?
The one other thing he tells his friend is, take a picture of those shoes. I want a picture of them. But his friend is catatonic. He will not move. He cannot hear anything he says. He's just frozen in place. So my brother says, I jump across the shoes. I don't want to touch these things. I'm going to go reset the alarms, and we're going to get out of here. And so he does that, and then says to his friend, get out, move. And the guy begins to slowly move as if in a daze, turns around, and he's going to pick up the shoes.
Oh, dear.
My brother is like, why is he doing this? But he says he loops his fingers into the shoes and puts them on the lower step of the staircase leading to the second floor. They leave, they get out, lock the door. He says, now, about 14 minutes have passed. It's 3:45 in the morning. Anyway, they're both horrified. Now, he says that his friend at that point coming around, he says, did you ask me to take a picture? They're already driving away. And he says, yes, I told you to take a picture. And he says, I guess you already put the camera in the car. So he says, no. I had it with me. I just couldn't process what you were saying. I couldn't do it. So anyway, they get back and they start to tell the story to somebody at one of the firehouses. His friend is a fireman, and the only discrepancy they have is, well, what are these shoes? And my brother describes them as the black adult shoes, woman's shoes. But his friend says, no, that's not what I picked up. I picked up small beaded slippers. That's what I
Hmm.
put there, right? So Monday morning comes around, and my brother has to go back to Eldon House, and he asks the people that run Eldon House, I hope you were able to do something with those shoes. And they go, well, what shoes? And he says, well, my friend found them on the floor, put them on the stairs. They go, no, we didn't see anything. So he does a search. He goes everywhere in the area, looks through the cupboards, everything, and then asks the person who's the curator. He says, there is no such item like that in our holdings. Absolutely none. There are no shoes, period, that describe either of the types that you guys mentioned. So I remember, though, him right after this just telling me, Peter, I can't sleep. This
Hmm.
is horrible. Every time I close my eyes, I have a dream about Eldon House. It's just killing me, right? He couldn't sleep for weeks properly. I remember him telling these details fresh at the time. The story did hold up entirely over the telling period, which is
Hmm.
something that I usually use to decide, is this person telling the truth or not? Do they have an accurate way of describing what happened? My brother, when he describes something, I trust him that whatever it is he's telling me, that is what he believes he's seen. So
Right.
anyway, the follow up to the story is this. 10 years later, he's doing Halloween benefit for Eldon House, and they ask people to come in and tell their scary stories. So he tells the story just about like I've told it here, and says no, nobody ever found those shoes. And he says one of the interpreters that run tours at Eldon House pulls him aside between the tours. And she says, you know, there is no such thing as that item in this house. But she says, I read the diary of the woman who lived here her entire life, 92 years. And she says, one thing that keeps coming up in the entry, she says, my servants are playing tricks on me. They
Oh,
keep on, they keep putting a pair of beaded slippers all over the house, and then the next moment I look and it's gone. This
weird.
strange beaded slippers, I can never be rid of them. So that is the end of my brother's horrible HVAC Eldon House story.
I was gonna say the worst part is the potential injury. Like I wonder, like if that happened to two different people at the same time, and there weren't any ill effects afterwards. It was just that one time it happened.
Just the one time that it happened, yeah.
Hmm.
Although my brother did say from then on, if he had to make a nighttime trip to
Yeah,
Eldon House, he would drive all the way 20 miles out of town, pick up his wife, and say, "We're going to Eldon House." So,
can't say I blame him. I mean,
no, I'm not going there alone.
and you can read the story on Monday Halloween, which is when this comes out. So today on our both our sites, I'm pretty sure it's there.
The one thing, you
Oh,
can
sorry. Go
also
ahead.
see some of the strange photos that his friend took, not of the shoes, but there are some very strange effects of things that he took photos of at Eldon House on that day, and you can see the original digital files
Oh,
as
cool.
well that are accompanying the story.
Well, now we'll get to our next part. What are your top three horror films and why, Peter?
Well, I was thinking about this, and I was thinking that as I rewatch horror films, they change in a way that they have the potential to scare me. So I started thinking about it in different terms. And what were the films that scared me the most the first time that I watched them? Because the effects kind of uh, lessen over time when after you've
Hmm.
been startled the first time. So the three films for me, and do you want me to describe each as I go,
Oh,
or
yeah,
do you
go
want
for
me
it.
to?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, the first one, oddly enough, was a horror comedy called Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. And the reason that this one scared me so badly, first of all, it's got three monsters. It's got Frankenstein monster, Dracula, and the Wolfman, all in the same movie. But there were two particular moments that horrified me the most, and one is The monsters played it dead straight. Only Abbott and Costello did the comedy. But at one time, there's a scene where Costello is strapped onto a table. They're going to remove his brain and put it into the brain of exchange it with the brain of the monster. And both the werewolf and the Frankenstein monster are getting into this horrible fight. But they're on either side of this table, and they just keep on pushing this rolling table back and forth as they're trying to get at each other and kill each other. And the idea of being helpless, strapped into that thing, just bothered me so much as a kid that I had bad dreams about it. But the worst scene in that is at one point they're in a hotel room. One of the guys is the Wolfman, and he says, I want you to lock this door. Don't open it. Tonight is the night of the full moon. But Costello decides, at a certain point, you've already seen the transformation has taken place. I got to go in there. I forgot to tell him something. And he goes in there, and there's just this excruciatingly frightening scene to me as a kid of him walking through this and the Wolfman trying to leap on him but missing him over and over, and him grabbing at one point an orange from a fruit bowl and going, oh, I think I'd really like an orange. And he walks out of the place, locks the door, and says, what if he counted as oranges? I better put this back. And that, to me, was utterly frightening, the idea that he would do that a second time. Now, the second movie would be the first Evil Dead, although I'm a big fan of the Evil Dead 2, Dead by Dawn, which is essentially just a remake of the first one, but with all the kind of comedy that made Bruce Campbell so successful. The first one, I'm sitting in a theater that's long gone, the Imperial 6 near Dundas and Yonge, and there was nobody in the theater. I'm watching it in the afternoon, and I am alone in the theater. And that is not a good experience for watching a horror movie.
No.
So, you want that little bit of reality to, and I remember that in this one, it was so gory, it was beyond anything I had ever seen at the time. But the way that these demons were presented as these pasty-faced freaks with horrible blue veins, and the fact that people turned into them so quickly, it really got to me. And I remember at a certain point they were doing kind of a card psychic test, trying to predict the cards, and at one point his girlfriend seems to be getting them all right, and they look over, and as they're pulling over the cards, yes, she keeps getting them right, and in the middle of it her voice starts getting deeper and deeper, and then she screams out, "You're all gonna die."
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
And then flies up into the corner of the ceiling, and those blue veins have grown on her arms and everything. And I just remember actually at that point kind of like turning away. I actually shielded my eyes. I was a young adult, but I actually put my hands over my eyes and turned away because I didn't want to see this in full view. So that was number 2. And number 3, I think, is the original version of The Grudge, just because those horrible broken boned creatures. The fact not only that they were so horrific to look at, these ghosts, but that they continue to experience the breakage of their bones after death. And watching that female ghost crawling up the stairs and listening to her broken bones crackle as they're further breaking, I think that was one of the things that the first time I ever saw an effect like that, it really did have an effect on me. And so I would say that would be number 3 of my current count.
Okay.
So
for me, and you're going to, well, mine are, you're going to find that I embrace the absurdity. My number 2 is Evil Dead 2, but I'll start with, because I love absurd, over-the-top horror, ridiculously gory comedy, just because it's so silly. But my number 3 is Father's Day, which is done by a bunch of guys from Manitoba called Astron 6. They made it for 10 grand. Troma bought it and then kind of ripped them off. But it is not for the faint-hearted. It is definitely not for anybody who doesn't like saucy humor, because there's plenty of that. And it's ridiculously gory. but it is very, very, very funny and and super cheap. And I'm not even gonna, I can't even tell you the plot without offending a family audience, so I'm not going to. but but it is very, very, and it's all done in a grindhouse style. But unlike most things, including the grindhouse film that Quentin Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez did, this feels more properly grindhouse than a lot of these remakes of grindhouse things did. Um, but yeah, and they've also made a great movie called Manborg, which is also very amusing and more of the same silliness. Although it's more like a PlayStation 1 game came to life. My number two is Evil Dead 2, because I love, and I remember watching it not in the theater. I saw it like on VHS because it had this rep in like junior high or high school whenever it came out. I think it was '87, so it's probably high school. Um, for being this over the top insane gore fest, which of course it was, and it's very, very silly and very, very funny. But I just kind of forgot about it for a long time. Watched it about a year ago and said, "Oh my God, I forgot how this movie does not screw around. Like 5 minutes in, it's an absolute mayhem, and it doesn't let up for the entire 90 minutes. It just pounds you in the face with crazy nonsense and it's very funny. And Bruce Campbell. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I did not put that one as my top three, is that it didn't scare me quite as much as the first one the first time, but it is a far better film and one of my high recommendations. And I did watch, by the way, Evil Dead 3 and the entire Ash versus Evil Dead series, which is a miracle that it actually got made.
Yeah, that's true. Finally got made. And I don't normally go to horror films for scares. I go for it for all the other technical stuff that I find fascinating. Having said that, my final one was probably my favorite horror film of all time, and it's completely different from all these. It's and it's kind of a controversial one because it's Exorcist 3, which I honestly think is better than the first one, or maybe it's differently better.
Hey, I gotta agree with you.
Okay.
I think it is more. The second one is not scary at all.
Oh, it's terrible. No, yeah.
Terrible. The first one is really a good film, but the third one to me is just the relentless atmosphere in that thing.
There's so much good about it. Like just as background, the first one was based on the book by William Peter Blatty, and it was directed by William Friedkin, and it is a classic film. And I'm not denigrating. It's a very, very, very good film. The second one they cashed in, and it wasn't good at all. The third one, by that time, everybody going to this, because I went to see it in 1990 in the theater, was like, okay, fine, whatever. But it was opening weekend. It was a full house. It's the only time I've been in a movie theater and everybody screamed at once. You know exactly which scene I'm going to talk about here. But yeah, it's William Peter Blatty wrote a book called Legion, and which had nothing to do with The Exorcist, and then it got made into a movie as long as it was an Exorcist movie. So the Exorcist stuff could have been stapled on, but is actually fairly well integrated into it after the fact. And it has the guy who plays Damien Karras, who's theoretically dead, but then he's Brad Dourif is a serial killer, and one of them possesses the other. You're not sure which. And since the guy who played Lieutenant Kinderman died in between the two movies, George C. Scott plays him, and he's brilliant as Kinderman.
Yeah, it is great.
And the dialogue is phenomenal because William Peter Blatty wrote the script too. And it's just, if you've ever seen The Ninth Configuration, which is another one of his movies that he wrote and directed, it's really funny and really well written. And the dialogue is just, you can't beat it. So the same with this, the dialogue in this movie, which you don't normally get in horror movies, which is not a slight because I really like horror movies, but you don't get very wordy, literate stuff in them most of the time. Or if you do, it's somebody who's like, beneath, horror movies are beneath them and they're making them for whatever reason. And this guy loves what he's making and also infuses a lot of smarts into it. But the best part about it is probably my favorite jump scare of all time, which it's a 30-some-year-old movie. I'm not spoiling anything at this point. Kinderman there's a long unbroken shot in a hallway at this nursing home where all these murders are happening, and nothing, literally nothing except this nurse going back and forth, check on rooms happens. And you're like, when's it going to happen? When's it going to happen? When's it going to happen? And then the shroud with gardening shears comes right up behind him. And in a 70s zoom, it zooms right up as it's about to cut her head off. And then it goes to, I can't remember. It's a really good jump cut, but it's something else. Like they're all looking at the details.
This creature is on the ceiling while she's doing it.
Yeah. Like these old people are getting possessed by whatever this thing is, this exorcist type thing.
Crawling across the ceiling like a freaking fly.
Yeah, and there's a great scene at the end where they do a kind of an exorcism with, but again, that's the other thing, studio mandated gore at the end, which they made them put in the movie. But other than that, there's barely any gore in this movie. It's all psychological scares, and it's phenomenally good, and it's completely underrated too, as far as I'm concerned.
It's interesting that when I read an interview with Blatty on all of these exorcist type films, a lot of people, you're horrible, you're a pervert, you're an evil guy for telling stories like this. But his underlying reason was that he said if he could make people believe in the existence of pure evil,
Mm-hmm.
then they would better be able to contemplate the existence of God, which was his ultimate
Well, he
goal.
was a pretty devout Catholic, wasn't he? I think, and I
Yeah,
believe
exactly.
when the first movie came out, the Catholic Church was kind of for it because they're like, well, this is actually a pretty accurate description of what we've gone through doing this, or the process thereof. Which, take it or leave it if you believe that. But the Catholic Church was not against the film, from what I recall.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's our top 3 horror films and a spooky story. So if you'd like to hear this or any other or previous Halloween specials or any other podcasts, we're on Apple Music, Amazon Music, and Spotify, and you can listen to us on the Journal of Commerce and Daily Commercial News websites. Peter, thanks you for joining us for this special.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it. Have me back next year because I'm counting.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
They're here.